Hello world, my name is Hristina Crenn from OneHealthLessons.com. Today I have the privilege to talk with Professor William Bograkos from the United States of America. Hello Professor, how are you doing today?
Oh, good morning, Christina. How are you?
I'm doing well, how are you?
Thank you very much for interviewing me today. I look forward to speaking to you and to sharing our knowledge of One Health during this particular time. I think it's very important to discuss One Health during this COVID Corona SARS-2, during the Corona SARS-2 pandemic, because it gives us an opportunity to seek recovery through better public health planning, which is through a One Health concept, and a One Health operational plan. Okay?
Yes, exactly.
I'll let you ask me questions.
Yes, exactly. As far as I know, you are a public health specialist, and you're particularly interested about the One Health approach. Could you perhaps share a little bit of information regarding your academic background? What did you do before? And how later on you decided to pursue a career in public health as well? It looks like you are having a very diverse academic background that I am interested to know, and I'm so sure that our and the people who are going to watch this interview will be interested to know as well.
Oh, thank you very much for your kind introduction. I have to address well, like you, I had more than one undergraduate major. So I had majors, undergraduate, collegiate majors in both zoology and psychology. But I graduated from college over 40 years ago. So today I understand that young people have the neuroscience undergraduate degree. When I was in college, I went back and forth. I was primarily interested in mammalian behavior, right? But I had to bridge two silos, the silo of psychology and the silo of zoology. And that's my foundation. Like you, and I think I'm speaking to undergraduate students and professors. So as an undergraduate, psychology and zoology, graduate courses in abnormal behavior, abnormal psychology, abnormal psychopharmacology, neurochemistry. It was different then. Then from undergraduate, I went to New York City and studied psychopharmacology, clinical. I worked for a psychiatrist, Nathan Klein, in Manhattan. From there, I went back to New England and studied medicine. So I studied osteopathic medicine, and the founder of osteopathy globally, Andrew Taylor Still, was a major in our Civil War. And after the war, he studied, or he reflected on the war, and he reflected on naturalism, and he reflected on nature, and he reflected on the teachings of Darwin and Spencer, and he created osteopathic medicine. I'm an osteopathic physician, so I'm an American-trained osteopathic physician. Okay, I did training in New York City, and then because I had scholarship, military scholarship, I went into the military. Having survived New York, I went to survival. So I spent 4 years at the survival school as an emergency medicine physician. The survive, evade, resist, escape. So again, more time in emergency medicine. And emergency medical systems. So I'm a systems type person. From there, I spent 30 years in the military, and I served with NATO forces in the Balkans as a division surgeon. Prior to that, I was a battalion surgeon. In the military, in the Army, a battalion is 500 soldiers. So I was a battalion surgeon for the military police. We have to give respect to our law enforcement people, because the public law enforcement is referred to as public safety. So public health and public safety have had a long history of collaboration. This is important partnership. And we have no question about public health, public safety, collaboration in domestic violence, or in child abuse, or in rabies, right? And physicians take care of canines as well. I'm a single species physician, unlike Dr. Thompson, who's a multi-species physician. So One Health is led by our veterinarians, of course, right?
Yes.
Now, again, going back to COVID, it's important to take the One Health concept when we are discussing operations. So in every public health instant command system, there must be a veterinarian or someone who speaks zoonotic infections and vectors and reservoirs and entomology as well. Someone who thinks epidemiology, and someone who understands zoology, and someone who understands zoonotic infections, correct?
Exactly.
Because, oh, by the way, we are speaking about Corona SARS-2 in 2019, but we have to remember SARS in 2003. And we have to understand zoonotic infections and the fact that bugs, viruses, bacteria jump species. It's important. I don't understand why people deny this, because in literature, global literature, you can look at the Quran, or you can look at the Old Testament and look at Exodus and the people of Israel. When they fled, when they were displaced, a plague fell upon them. What was that plague? Because they moved with their sheep, their cattle, and their goats. That plague was Bacillus anthracis, which is still very common if you look at WHO, World Health Organization. So if you look at people in Africa or Mideast who are still working with, who are still shepherds, or still have contact with these, with goat, cattle, sheep, Bacillus anthracis is common. And what other bugs have jumped? Or where else did have bugs played a very important part in the world? So when you think of plague, right? So tell me, when you think of plague, what do you think of?
Well, I immediately think about some historical events, like for instance, the big plague that happened in Istanbul in 1400s.
Sure, sure. So what you're talking about Yersinia pestis, huh?
Yes,
So you're talking about the plague of the Byzantine Empire
exactly.
and the plague that followed the Silk Roads? Or did the plague travel by itself? No, the plague followed trade. And the plague followed trade, and horses and rats and fleas were on the rats, right? And then plague came to the United States in 1908. How did it come? It came by ships, and it came by rats and fleas on the ships, fleas on the rats. This is Yersinia pestis, and it spread to every state in the country. So this is plague, right? And again, that's 1905, 1910. But today we have air travel. So this is something that makes One Health even more important, because now human disseminators of COVID are a potential threat. So you have to think, what will nations do? Will nations shut down air travel from particular countries because they cannot control their COVID? Very interesting question. And it's important for One Health as well. There are many other outbreaks, zoonotic outbreaks in history, such as Malta, right?
Yeah, or Spanish flu as well.
Spanish flu, the influenza,
I mean,
right?
as a pandemic. I mean, as a pandemic, Spanish flu.
As a pandemic, right?
Yeah.
Right. And so these viruses don't just pop out of space. Viruses, they mutate. Mutate. So mutation is another threat.
Exactly.
But with every outbreak you need to identify, share the medical intelligence, and contain and control. So we have to think of public health outbreaks as outbreaks of a fire. So your fire might be slow, might be a slow fire like tuberculosis or malaria that nobody pays attention to, or that has less attention. Or it might be explosive, like a viral hemorrhagic fever, such as Ebola or Marburg. So they're explosive. But in order to prevent that huge fire from going all over the world, you have to contain and control it. And it's important to speak the truth in order to do that. Are we okay?
Yes, definitely. You know, like today I was giving a talk for a conference in Istanbul via Zoom, and the topic about the conference, the topic of the conference was about cyber law and data protection on the internet, and during the era of COVID-19. And basically, what I have noticed that actually a majority of legal specialists nowadays are just seeing the legal framework regarding society, regarding nature, regarding the scope of events in history. But today also I mentioned during the presentations that I was actually giving, I mentioned the approach of One Health and how it is important to relate medical law and this approach of One Health from the veterinary medicine in the aspect of the legal world. Because it is because we are nowadays speaking about, you know, always about global health, public health, but we are not really promoting or the idea of One Health as a concept. So basically, some of the lawyers and the professors were a little bit confused. They didn't understand what I was talking about. So I was saying, like, now, you know, it's important to analyze not only the legal aspect of COVID-19, but also its medical aspect, which is it's a zoonotic disease. And when we are trying to combine approaches, not only from law, but from history and from veterinary medicine, we are trying to combine the points, the different points, and come up with one conclusion. So I think that nowadays politicians, at least in the region where I live, I'm originally from Macedonia, from Prilep in the Balkan region. And I have noticed that politicians are nowadays just talking about COVID-19, but they're never talking about the origin of COVID-19. So what is your opinion regarding this denial that you just mentioned from the side of politicians and from the side of perhaps the world organizations regarding this?
Do you have good picture? Can you see me?
No, I can't see you. I just see you. I just see your name, actually.
Okay. My camera is not working?
Yes, it's working. I can hear you very well.
Okay. I would like you to refer to the Interpol website.
Yes.
So interpol.int,
Exactly.
and look at the bioterrorism conferences. They began in 2004 under Secretary General Ron Noble. So 2004, 2005, 2006. And there you will have definitions of biocrime and bioterrorism. Bioterrorism is a deliberate use of an agent in order to achieve political goals. So this is important for for the community. And when we speak to lawyers or politicians, I mean, Secretary General Ron Noble was an advocate for the bioterrorism, and he held a conference on every continent until he retired. The first was in 2004 in Lyon. So when we are studying bioterrorism, we are studying deliberate use of a zoonotic infection to achieve a political goal. When we are talking about biocrimes, that has to be understood by lawyers. Biocrimes could be something as smuggling an exotic mammal to the United States, and then the repercussion is monkeypox. Do you remember reading about that? Or smuggling an exotic bird
Exactly.
to the Southwest and have an explosion of exotic disease, right? And in order to control that exotic disease, it was in Southern California and the Southwest, this is where our fire scope instant command system began. And sometimes public health doesn't speak proper instant command system management or unified command system management. Okay, so this is important that we all speak one language when we're speaking One Health. The fact that the politicians, that really reflects poorly on them. A leader will listen to their subject matter experts. Again, my background as a battalion surgeon, as a major, I reported to a lieutenant colonel. As a lieutenant colonel in a division, 10,000 troops, I reported to a major general. So as a 05, I reported to a 08, right? But as a physician, I wore two hats. One, as an operational physician, I wear the hat of emergency medical systems and public health system. Now, if a general or a leader does not listen to the medical subject matter experts, then they have casualties, which is the truth. And they know that. And the other part about military medicine is that every commander understands that disease and non-battle injury produces more casualties than bullets and bombs. So regarding the politicians of today, denial is not a useful strategy.
At all.
The politicians today need to lead, and part of their leadership is to care for their people. It's just basic. It's basic. And now you can go back to military history. So when the greatest historian, or the very first historian really in military history, was Thucydides. So in the Balkans, Thucydides wrote about the 28-year war between the Athenians and the Spartans, right? My name is Bograkos. I'm Bograkos, so I'm a Spartan. But when the Athenians built a wall around their city, a plague fell upon them. and left the Spartans untouched. What was that plague? That plague was hantavirus. That plague was viral hemorrhagic fever. So if you read Thucydides again, and you read about the plague, you'll see symptoms. You'll see how Thucydides writes about viral hemorrhagic fever. And you realize walls, rats, rats have droppings, droppings aerosolize, droppings concentrate the hantavirus, and hence the plague or a viral hemorrhagic fever. So every historian understands the plague and the threat. The greatest fear of any sea captain is fire and outbreak on their ship. The greatest, you only have to look at 1950-ish Soviet American offensive programs, or other programs too. We're not the only people who had offensive programs, but the weapons were zoonotic infections. Why did they choose them? Because history gave examples of outbreaks, to include T. mycotoxin in the Soviet Union, to include plague in Vietnam, to include the Great Plagues that we've already discussed, to include Bacillus anthracis, etc. And in the 1950s, there were also weapons that targeted crops, corn, wheat, rice. How did the 28-year war end between the Athenians and the Spartans? Did you read that? You're from the Balkans.
Yes, but I not really. I
No,
haven't.
no, I'm just.
I haven't
So
studied.
the war ended because Lysander stopped the wheat from coming into the country. So there in history, you see the importance of food.
Yes,
So
about that
food,
exactly.
so from farm to fork is a target for adversaries, but it's also something that we must protect. And it's also something that we become more cognizant of when we address One Health, right? Because natural viruses, bacteria, fungi attack our wheat as well, our wheat and our corn, our crops. Okay?
Yes, yes, exactly. Actually, we are studying in our school curriculum about the Greek Athenian and about the war between the Athenians and the Spartans, but we do not study actually the reasons. We just mention it happened in that date and that date and that's it. But that perhaps I studied last time, maybe in fifth grade. That was perhaps 12 years ago.
Yeah. The
Yeah,
other part, the other important point there is that, yes, I know we study in school,
yes,
but sometimes it takes us a while to understand it.
yes, the
So
reason behind it, absolutely, yeah.
because our names are so complicated that we sometimes forget how to read. But
Um,
but
Yes, like I study history, but I'm much more interested about the history of art, archaeology. So this is my domain of interest. This is what I'm studying more, art history actually. And regarding like, I'm not a fan of military history, but I study it and out of curiosity. But I must say that perhaps like regarding the Athenian model of early democracy, there were some concepts, like concepts about how the society was attached to the divine elements of polytheism, basically, and then at the same time, that is the religious. Let's say religious is a very modern term, but let's say the part of the belief system, and at the same time, we have sort of institutions that are divinely governed at the same time by the people. So that is the interesting point when we're trying to make a relation between legal history, institutional history, and history as a separate branch. And there we come out to a process that perhaps I can ask you as another question. Like, you visited the Balkan region, and also you worked for the NATO alliance as a peace commissioner, right? So what is your opinion regarding peace trajectories in the Balkan over the history?
So the Balkans, right? So Balkans means Black Mountains.
Yes.
So, and when people say Balkanize, they really need to reflect on the terrain. So Balkanized, Black Mountains. So we have different Khoria or different villages, and different villages have different mentality. So this is another opportunity. One Health is another opportunity to bring people together. Now, Thucydides, the major teaching point is the benefit of coalitions. So it's better to build bridges than walls. Martin Luther King said that. So it's better to build bridges than walls. So when the Athenians built that wall, the plague fell upon them and left the Spartans untouched. So in the Balkans, we also have, you have Balkan endemic nephropathy, right? It comes down both shores of the river, Danube River. And it doesn't matter if you're Orthodox, Muslim, or Catholic. The toxin doesn't care, and neither do viruses or bacteria. So the concept of One Health is important in bringing people together. I know I'm very much aware of the long history in the Balkans of movement and wars and competition. I'm very much aware. It's in our music, right?
Yes.
It's in the music of Macedonia, Greece,
yes,
Kosovo, everywhere. It's in the music, so history is taught and taught.
Yes.
But
traditional music mainly.
Traditional music. But it's more important to see what we have in common than it's easy to say, oh, she's from there, he's from there, their grandparents did this, their great-grandparents did that, centuries ago that happened, et cetera, et cetera. And people will instigate. So those people who instigate, and we've seen that, right? We saw that in 1994. We saw that in 1994 in Yugoslavia, instigators. So those people have the pathos, they have the pathology. Those people who are evolving, like us, like One Health, like osteopathic medicine, we evolve. So the man and woman who are in evolution find a way to unite. So One Health, especially now we're in the emergency phase of a pandemic, we are, you can't argue that. We're still in the emergency phase of the public health disaster. From the emergency phase, we have to engage One Health concepts as we plan to transition into the recovery phase. From the recovery phase of disaster medicine, we then go to a stronger development phase. Now, the One Health across the different Khoria, the different villages, the different countries in the Balkans requires that we address One Health to address the global public health threat. COVID is the opportunity, because the disaster, what does disaster mean, right? Yes. Disaster, Greek, Latin, the stars are out of alignment. So you look up in the heavens and say, oh God, oh. So, but in order to put those stars in alignment, you have to have collaboration. And the other part about disasters, a disaster means that you're overwhelmed. Your resources are overwhelmed by the stresses. Here we have COVID. So you cannot have a country like Montenegro or Macedonia, Greece, Albania, they cannot do it alone because the virus knows no boundaries. So you have to have collaboration. And then going back to cyber, you can utilize your cyber for reach back. So you may have a different approach in Macedonia than they do in Vermont, even though you are state partners. You are Macedonia and from the state of Vermont participate in the state partnership program, so they collaborate. So you don't need to move. The people from Vermont can't move to mobilize to Macedonia anyways, because we're in a pandemic, but you can share knowledge through cyber.
Yes, and also, you know, like during, I mean, a couple of months ago, many doctors from Cuba, actually, Cuba, went to Italy to volunteer. So we have also not only a regional cooperation, but in the Apennine Peninsula, basically in Italy, there is also an international cooperation, which I think that is very significant, if as a cooperation, as a method. And you know, in the Balkan region, I noticed that Slovenia, in my opinion, Slovenia had until now the best management system regarding COVID-19. While the other Balkan regions were more focusing this period to solve political problems, but not really focus about the origin in the problem of COVID-19 that they are supposed to tackle actually. Um, like, what is your opinion regarding the third or possible fourth wave of coronavirus that some politicians are announcing? Like, do you believe or do you think that there is going to be a third wave of coronavirus?
So now we're going back to language. So um, there will be waves, right? Because it's a respiratory contagion. So our goal is to transition from emergency phase based on numbers our public health people report to recovery phase. A wave in natural infectious disease, especially respiratory infectious disease, there will always be waves. What's important to look at is the slope of that wave. Well, but that brings us back to testing, right? So when we look at case definitions, how do we define the case, right? You can look at cdc.gov, you can look at PAHO, PAHO.org, you can look at the European surveillance and education websites. So how do we identify what is the case definition? So case definitions usually talk about suspected, probable, and confirmed. In order to get a confirmed case definition, we have to have laboratory capability and capacity. Now, some politicians may say, oh, I don't want a lot of testing because that'll make me look bad. Well, okay, fine. You're not going to have testing in the community, but your hospitals are going to have casualties because you're not slowing down the outbreak. You cannot contain and control what you cannot identify. So regarding the waves, yes, we'll have more waves, but now that we have vaccinations rolling out, that is one way of containing and controlling and decreasing the slope on the next wave. The slope and the peak. The peak is from defining. Now, and that brings us back to the workshop. Are we identifying in the laboratory, or are we identifying in the hospitals? And then where is that data going? So that's where public health operations comes in. So in the incident command management system, public health, or the unified command management system, One Health needs to be in that operational section. One Health also needs to be in strategic communication. So it's a bit challenging, but it's more challenging without the proper expertise at the command center. So in Macedonia, Montenegro, Greece, Albania, Vermont, Maine, if you don't have a good command center, then you're a bit lost. Going back to more military history, the Sun Tzu, The Art of War, talked about the nature of man, talked about moral influence, talked about terrain like the Balkans, talked about command and control, talked about doctrine. And if you don't have command, then you're setting yourself up for failure.
Yes, and actually, you know, some like for instance, I know that like recently in Italy, they built a new hospital in some part of Italy. I don't remember which part, but they built a hospital for 4 months only. This hospital was meant actually to be a COVID-19 center. While in the Balkan region, in order to build a hospital, you know, with all the regulations, sometimes a hospital can be built in a period of 6 years, which is a really long period for a country, for some country.
Good for you. Good for you. What you're addressing are the alternative care facilities.
Yeah.
So an alternative care facility doesn't have to be a fixed structure.
Absolutely.
And all of our NATO colleagues know that, because that's how we deploy. I mean, NATO colleagues deploy to Iraq, to Afghanistan, Europeans deploy to Africa. I mean, this is how we deploy. So in the United States of America in 1997, our Soldier Biological Chemical Command developed what they called the Neighborhood Emergency Help Center. Though that concept is not anything new either. That's how we take care of refugees, by not fixed facilities, but mobile facilities. So when the threat is the surge of patients and the surge of patients who might be infectious, you have to have alternative care facilities. You're not going to build a hospital. That doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense financially, and it doesn't make sense operationally. So what you do, and coming from the Army, you want a mobile facility on land. You don't want to take your casualties on a ship either.
Yes, but what I found interesting regarding Italy, that they, you know, built for 4 months a fixed hospital, you know, while generally in the Balkan region, for building a fixed hospital in a place, someplace, we need like almost 10 years. And regarding, I speak about the slowness of justice a little bit, the changing or the modifications of many laws. So you're right. In this period of NATO, in this period of COVID-19, and NATO and other organizations are basically helping these countries in development to make mobile hospitals where these hospitals actually will serve as COVID-19 centers, as temporary COVID-19 centers. But again, what I noticed, like in the Balkan region, there is the problem, you know, like politicians are fighting in order to preserve their reputation, saying, I did this, I made this hospital, I ordered this statue to be placed in the main square, or etc., etc. So there's always the competition for being better than the other, and which is, I think, in my opinion, a very negative attitude during a pandemic or an outbreak like this one that we're having.
Yeah, there's no room for the narcissist in the unified command center.
Yes.
So they get in the way.
Yes.
So
Yes, that is what is happening actually generally in the Balkan region. But over time, I truly hope that the situation will improve, and perhaps we'll have better management policies regarding pandemics or epidemics.
The other part too is that we have to share best practices. And I know the Italians have great expertise in earthquake response.
Yes.
So this concept comes from there too. 1984, the hospitals in Mexico City were destroyed because of the earthquake. So that means hospitals were destroyed, patients were lost because of earthquakes. So
Yes,
this is something, these are lessons learned from disaster medicine.
exactly.
You have, in addressing the COVID disaster, we have to take lessons learned from One Health, and we have to take lessons learned from past pandemics and apply them. But we have to speak a common language too. Besides One Health operations, we have to talk about what is our instant command management system, what does it look like? So when I was in the Black Sea region, we would speak in many languages, between Russians, Ukraine, Romania, Moldova, Turkey, multiple languages, Russian, English, but we were also speaking public health, emergency management, Interpol. So the other part here that's important in outbreaks is just like firefighting, just like crime, is geographic information systems. Are you familiar with that?
Yes. Pretty much, because actually regarding for instance, the seismology as a science in the Balkan region, we have
Oh, wow.
we have strong centers,
Wow.
but because we are actually also Istanbul as a city, they expect sooner or later to happen unpredictable earthquake. We don't know when it will happen, but one day it will happen. And for instance, I think that the most important about this is to have the sense of preparedness, how to act during some unexpected situation. That's why in this part of the bulk of the world, in Southeast Europe especially, from what I know, we have two sayings. One saying is that everything in life is unpredictable, exactly like the earthquakes. You don't know when they will occur. So, and from the other side, we are often saying that history is a perpetual commencement, and therefore we should study from the best practices of the history that you just mentioned about regarding, having a better management system. So definitely definitely I think that's why nowadays young people should have some knowledge about every science a little bit, and know a little bit, or just know a few words of each language, like you mentioned.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Right. So even at the individual level, the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior.
Yes.
So when we elect our leaders, what did they do before is a good prediction of what they're going to do in the future, especially when they're stressed. The geographic information system, right. Greece, Italy partnership during earthquake is very important. We've seen that before in the past. So besides what you addressed is so important, and everyone knows that. So you're talking about earthquakes. We can also talk about crime, violent crime, plotting it, what part of the city is dangerous with GIS. This is what law enforcement does. Where the Balkan route, right, from the Golden Crescent, from Afghanistan, Iran, Pakistan, through Turkey, through the Balkan route to Europe for opium, for heroin, that we have to do mapping with that. That's the Balkan route. In outbreak scenarios, where are the hot spots?
Exactly.
So here's an outbreak. Put it on the map. That way you don't have a lot of people sitting around the table drinking Turkish coffee, Greek coffee, complaint, and getting excited across the table. You have to look at a map and say,
Exactly. But majority of people, like for instance, in my city, they are saying, "Oh, coronavirus doesn't exist. It's a conspiracy theory, etc., etc." So these are just everyday, daily talks among people that are actually not valid. But that's people how they live their life. Just saying perhaps sometimes invalid things without being aware that actually yes, there is coronavirus. We know that is a zoonotic disease, but majority of the people living in the cities or living in the villages will never hear the word zoonotic or the word One Health. So that's why I think
uh,
our role is to.
yeah, that's very interesting. That's very interesting. All over the world, it's easy to deny, but it's also our job going back to public health, incident command management systems, tactical and strategic communication needs to address zoonotic infection.
Absolutely.
We buy a cat when we live on the farm, or a hodja. When we live in a hodja, village, farm, we have a cat. We love cats and dogs and pets, but we also like the cat getting rid of the rodents and getting rid of that hunter, mitigating or eliminating hunter virus, eliminating fleas, eliminating Yersinia pestis, etc. That's why it's important to talk history. During World War II, when the Germans came down into the Balkans and they took refuge in the barns, in the hay, what happened with them? They had outbreaks of Q fever. Huh. So I think sometimes when we talk about military history, people wake up because they're used to seeing that type of television. But adding the public health threats to deployments may wake some people up. And to talk about Corona SARS, let's just go back to 2003. It's a respiratory contagion. So just wear PPE, which is personal protective equipment. Okay, you don't need you don't need to wear a level A suit to live in your life for the rest of your life, but just wear a mask for protection. Protect yourself and protect others. So I think a lot of what you have in One Health education is important teaching tools. And I also use those tools now. I just remembered when I was with the military police, my mission, of course, was to take care of our policemen, military police, but our mission was also to take care of enemy prisoner of war. So the threat presented is tuberculosis, right? That's a threat. That's a respiratory threat. That was before SARS, but mask is something that is easy enough to do. Law enforcement understands rabies. You can't see a rabies virus, but you certainly are aware that people die when they get rabies from bats or dogs or cat or other reservoirs. They understand that. They understand blood-borne pathogens. People understand blood-borne pathogens with IV drug abuse and with HIV, but they're still denying COVID. They're still denying Corona, SARS, and now we're faced with the challenge of misinformation and disinformation. So in order to counter that, we have to put out a better message. So often in public health, well, all disaster medicine, often in disaster medicine, we have to speak with one voice. So the One Health, One Voice is the best voice
Or strategy.
today for our strategic communication.
Exactly.
Because again, disaster, emergency phase, how do we move towards recovery? Strategically, one voice, one health, educate, empower. I would rather be educated and empowered than enslaved by mis and disinformation.
You're absolutely right. Right. I mean, it is totally true that nowadays misinformation as an instrument is perhaps the reigning. You know, it is like having some royal power over the huge mass of people that is actually becoming uncontrollable. I would like really to thank you very much.
I just need to say one thing that you made me think about.
Yes,
I
sure.
spent 9 months in Bosnia-Herzegovina.
Yes,
So as a physician, I learned that among the three entities, there were three entities of physicians as well.
yes.
And one entity would criticize another entity's medical care. So
That is still
once you
nowadays.
lose,
Yes.
so this is very true. Disinformation and misinformation is a type of virus that will enable a population. It's just like drugs. Misinformation, heroin use, opium use, alcohol use, targeting a population is a weapon of adversity, of our adversaries. I think people understand that. Uh, and I think our job, again, going back to what you said, we have to get a one voice, one health, strategic communication as we strive to move from the emergency phase to the recovery phase. And I'll send you one picture
Sure, please.
of, I'll send you one diagram of this in which I use to discuss deployment, post-deployment, and military operations. I also have reference to Iliad and Odyssey there, so
Yes.
you like that. I'll
Um,
send it to you via LinkedIn.
yes, please, and I will share it on the One Health social media platforms as well. You're
Okay,
right. You're right. Thank you very much for this valuable feedback and all of this great information that you have shared with me and with the rest of the audience. We definitely need to be more aware about the importance of COVID-19 as a zoonotic disease, like, you know, concepts matter. It is very important to master the origin of concepts and their etymological meaning as well in order to be able to understand better the circumstances of an outbreak or a pandemic like the one we're living nowadays. Thank you very much for your time and hope
okay,
to talk to you soon.
okay, Christina, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Ciao.
All the best. Ciao, ciao.